Hey guys, it's Chelsea. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. After you watch the video, you can leave a comment and a like. Join our growing family. We would love to have you. So over the weekend, I was thinking about content that I want to produce for you guys and that I want to put out, and I was really thinking about doing something called maybe like a mental madness or mental Monday. I'm not really sure what title will go with. I guess you'll know because you're reading it, but I'm not really sure yet. I don't even think it'll be like every Monday, maybe like every other Monday or once a month. And I just want to talk about like mental health issues or things that I'm currently struggling with, and maybe you can relate to that. So yeah, so the first thing I actually want to talk to you guys about today is grief. And I think how grief affects your mental health is so wild, because I feel like with grief, sometimes obviously you're grieving. In my case, it was the death of my dad. Sorry to all 0 of you guys who were expecting a part 2 to that video and never got it. Maybe at some point. It was just kind of overwhelming to film. Anyway, for me, grief is very like a process, obviously, but I didn't realize like how you kind of continue to grieve throughout life. And I think you continue not to grieve what you had, but what you didn't have. Like, I was watching TikToks today. I got sucked into the TikToks where people were like they were like editing like so I was looking at like the song track, but most of the videos there were people who were editing in like someone's deceased loved ones into like their wedding pictures for them to have, or things like that. And I think I just spent like an hour and a half watching it and just sobbing, because first of all, it was so beautiful, but it also just kind of reminded me of the things that I won't get to have with my biological dad. I say biological dad because one day I might still have a father-daughter dance and it just be with like my father-in-law or my mom or my sister or something like that. So I don't get to have, my dad walk me down the aisle. I don't get to have that father-daughter dance, that first look with my dad. There's so many things, and I think as I'm getting older, my grief comes, instead of shifting from the grief of him dying, I'm grieving the things that I don't get to have. Like, and I think it's okay, and I think that it's healthy, because when those things occur, you grieve those things. Like, when I launched a business, I know like how supportive my dad is in everything that his kids would do. Obviously, he's still supporting us in heaven, but physically, he would always just be so supportive. And so I grieved not having him there to cheer me on, or to get to show him the things that I was working on or the things that I did. I had to grieve the loss of what could have been, and I grieved the loss of those moments. And I think there's like certain situations where you never know, you never know if someone's going to get married, even though I think I'm going to get married. So when that moment comes up, I'll probably grieve that again. But I think grief is just, it's not a simple process. I think people think like, somebody dies and you grieve not having them anymore, and then maybe a year or two down the road you're fine, you're not grieving anymore. But nobody talks about the leftover, the residual grief, the grief that comes when something exciting happens and they're not there, or the grief that comes when you're on a vacation and you're buying souvenirs for everybody in your family. Your thought process is, let me buy something for my father. And then you have to remind yourself that like you don't have a father physically. And I think my sister showed me something. It's called The Ball in the Box, and I'll read it. So I'm off Psych Central. I don't know who came up with this, but it says, imagine your life is a box and the grief you feel is a ball inside of the box. Also inside the box is a pain button. Obviously, I'm going to have pictures up here for you guys. In the beginning, when the loss is so fresh and new, the grief that many people feel is overwhelming and large. It's so large, in fact, that every time you move the box, moving through your everyday life, the grief ball can't help but to hit the pain button. The ball rotates around the box at random, hitting the pain button every time. This is how many people initially experience loss. You can't control it and you can't stop it. The pain just keeps coming pretty regularly, no matter what you do or how much others try and comfort you. The pain as a person's experiences may feel unrelenting and never ending. Over time, however, the ball starts to shrink on its own. You can still go through life and the grief ball still rattles around the box. But because the ball has gotten smaller, it hits the pain button a little less often. You almost feel like you can go through most days without even having the pain button hit. But when it does hit, it can be completely random and unexpected, like when you're staring at a person's name in your friends list or come across their favorite video or TV show. The pain button still delivers the same amount of pain no matter how large or how small the ball is. As time passes, the ball continues to shrink with it, our grief for the loss experienced. Most people never forget the loss they experienced, but over time the ball becomes so small that it rarely hits the button. When it does, it is still as painful and hard to understand as it was the very first time we felt it. But the frequency of the hits has decreased significantly. This gives a person more time in between each hit, time used to recover and feel normal again. Time allows our hearts to heal and to begin to remember the person as they were in life. Grief is never experienced the same way for any two people, but it helps to know that the grief impacts most of us in a way where the pain is intense as the beginning, but the frequency, if not the intensity, of the pain lessens over time. Most of us walk through life carrying our own box with a ball of grief inside of it. Remember that the next time you see someone as they may be struggling with their own ball in the box. And I think that is such a perfect way to describe grief. And I think people think grief means the death of someone, and in my case that's true, but grief can also mean the death of something. Maybe it's that business that you lost, the degree you never got, that friendship. You can be grieving over a relationship. It doesn't have to be the death of someone, but it can be the death of something, and that does not mean that the grief and the pain you feel is any less significant. Obviously, if someone dies, don't be like, well, I get it because I lost my job once. Obviously, that's tacky. Don't do that. But nonetheless, the grief you feel is still significant. And I just want to talk about that because today that ball hit my pain button and I cried almost as if my dad had died that morning. And I think it's just so crazy how grief is such a, it's not always a short-term thing, but it does happen less frequently, but it doesn't mean that the pain is any different, I guess. And I think the thing that I always try to tell people, which is crazy because I used to tell people this and I even tweeted it before my dad even died, as I was like, the biggest thing is that we forget that when someone dies, just because we stopped hurting doesn't mean that someone else has. And I will never be okay with someone just living their life forever in grief and despair and in sorrow, because first of all, anybody who was in their right mind or who is now in their right mind because they're in heaven would not want that for you. They would not want you to go about your life being sad and depressed and dismayed forever and a day because they're no longer with us. Their desires for you is to go and to be fruitful and to multiply and even complete the things that they couldn't do while they were here. And I feel like sometimes we allow grief to block our, it's almost like we put on these duct taped lenses where we can't see anything in front of us. All we can see is that darkness and that blackness and that pain that we feel in the moment. But it just takes one moment or one person to come and take the glasses off. Obviously I need these, but to take off the grief glasses and say, no, there's so much more a road ahead of you. There's so much life left to still live, and you have to be alive to live it, because a lot of you guys are still breathing, but you're not alive. You're not living. And so that is what I wanted to just kind of discuss with you guys today. And grief, I feel like we have this thing to where we're like, well, it's been a couple years, I'm not allowed to grieve anymore. When I came home from college, that's how I felt, because I was away for a year and a half, maybe sometime around there, after my dad passed away. And during that time, I was so busy with sports and with tests and with schools that I would tell myself, like, I don't have time to grieve. So by the time I had the time, I felt like my grief wasn't valid anymore. Like, and I think because of that, I buried that grief deep into my heart and I never expressed it. And because of that, I felt like I was going through life grieving in every aspect. I couldn't go on. I couldn't do certain things because I was going to be too sad that he wasn't going to be there to see it. I didn't want to get married because I knew my dad wouldn't be present at the wedding. And it just became to where I was no longer living. I was just alive. I didn't live my life in a purpose, because when I think about it, I am my dad's legacy now. I get the ability to continue what he started. So when I walk around as if life has no hope and when life has no meaning, or I don't want to do anything now because I'm living from a constant state of unresolved grief, I do a disservice to the person who was here and who they were and who they are and what they instilled in me. And that doesn't have to be a parent. That could be a friend. That could be a job. You're doing a disservice to yourself, because there is more. It's like the Lion King when he told him there is more to you than what you allowed yourself to become.
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are.
Grief is something that happens to us. It is not who we are. There's a Bible verse that says, I have filled your heart with greater joy. Happiness, grief, anger, sadness, those are all fleeting. But joy, because it's inside of us, it's eternal. We get to live out of a place of joy on a constant day-to-day basis, and I would be doing a disservice to who my father was and who God created me to be if I chose to take out that joy and toss it to the side and live out a constant state of grief because this is what happened to me. I don't get to choose what happens to me, but I get to choose how I respond to it. So for that long period of time where I wasn't allowing myself to have that actual moment of grieving what I lost, I was doing a disservice to myself, because there's probably so many things that I could have done. And I'm not saying that like you shouldn't take time to grieve. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, take that time. Like, I wish I would have been like, this is what it is and I need this time. I can retake this test. I can retake this class, but I can't get back this time. It would have helped me so much, ruining so many different forms of relationships because I had so much unresolved grief, because I wasn't alive inside. I wasn't thriving. So I killed everything else to satisfy the grief that was still inside of my heart.